Hello everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So today I have a slightly different video than normal, as you can probably tell by the fact you can't see my face. Today I am going to be doing a video on the personal statement. However, I thought that I would try it from a slightly different point of view, and instead of just me telling you things to include, what not to include and how to write it, today I thought that I would just sort of do a plan with me style of video, so where I'm going to talk about what to include in the personal statement, but by doing that I will actually be planning a personal statement and you can plan yours along with me. So if you don't have a piece of paper in front of you and a pen or pens, whatever, then I suggest you go get one, and then hopefully we can plan a personal statement together. Okay, so hopefully you've got some pens and paper in front of you. I've just got a big A3 piece of paper and some Sharpie pens next to me, but it doesn't have to be that. Also, you can just use a Word document if you find that easier. Okay, so before I actually start going into the planning process, what I think we should do is just make a checklist of things to include and key information about the personal statement. So, I think there are two key points to remember about the personal statement. So the first one is that the personal statement should be under 4,000 characters. And that includes spaces. And quite linked into this point is the fact that you have a 47 line limit. So even if you're within the 4,000 characters, if it's over 47 lines, then you can't submit it, and vice versa. So those are just two bits of information that are important. However, at this stage of the process, that's really not that important, because your personal statement, your first draft, second draft, third draft, will almost likely be way above that limit. So I wouldn't worry about that. The cutting down is something that you will do in the later stages of your personal statement, but if you're just starting on a personal statement, it's something that you really don't need to worry about. Okay, so what things do we need to be thinking about including in the personal statement? So there's a pretty standard layout to personal statements, but in particular medicine personal statements. Okay, and I'm just going to, in this right hand corner, just do a small box, and I'm just going to list sort of structure and just general points and things to consider whilst we're doing this. So the first thing would be, why do you want to study medicine? So have a think about that. And something to link into that is, if you're already doing some health-related degree, so such as nursing or physiotherapy, something like that, in addition to that question, not only why do you want to study medicine, but why is your current vocation, so nursing for example, why do you not want to do nursing and you know that you want to do medicine? Because you might want to expand on that in your personal statement. And the second thing is somewhat related, but why do you want to be a doctor? And that's sort of very linked into my point, especially if you're doing nursing. So why do you want to be a doctor? I'm just going to abbreviate that. So other things that you'll want to include are skills and the evidence for that. So there's no point just sort of saying, I am really good when it comes to problem solving, or I am really good at working in a team. Yes, that is great that you are good at teamwork, but you want to be able to somehow prove that you're good at teamwork, or that, for example, that you know how to problem solve, like some form of evidence, whether that's coursework or some other experience. So evidence as well as the skills. And this is particularly relevant to graduate entry medicine students, and that's your degree that you've done and what you've learnt from it. The skills that you've developed from that, experiences it's given you, just things like that, your general degree. At first you might think, I don't know what my degree has taught me, especially if you've done a degree that isn't related to medicine whatsoever, such as law or history or something like that. You might not be able to think of any reason why you should include information about it, but there are always going to be transferable skills from your degree that are going to be important, and you are going to want to write about in your personal statement. Okay, so the big section is obviously going to be work experience, volunteering, and or paid work. This section often makes up the largest chunk of a medicine personal statement, and rightly so in my opinion. But it's important not to just list all the work experience that you've done. You really want to be able to reflect on the work experience and things that you've learnt from studying from doing that placement, for example. So those are just things that you'll need to include, but other key points to think about is you want to, I'll do a different bullet point, you want to prove your motivation for medicine. You're going to make sure you're using some form of spell check and checking your grammar as well. That's really important. You want to be making a good impression for your personal statement. So this is something that's also really important. And also, you want to make your personal statement specifically for the universities that you are applying for. So that's going onto their website or their prospectus and really finding out the key words and things that they are looking for specifically, whether that be communication or problem solving or integrity or honesty. Each university will have a different set of features that they are looking for in their medical students or their prospective medical students, and you'll want to write your personal statement to try to include as many of the key features as that they want as possible. So I'll just write specific to the university, to the unis. Okay. To help you with this, I'm going to recommend something called Tomorrow's Doctors. You can find it on the internet. Just Google Tomorrow's Doctors, and there's a PDF document, and that sort of lists all the characteristics and features that medical schools are looking for in their medical students or hopeful medical students. And so check that out, because that's really useful, and it will give you lots of buzzwords and phrases and things that you can use in your personal statement to help prove that you know what being a doctor is all about and why you want to do it, and that you've got the right reasons and the right motivation for applying to medicine. Okay, so that just sort of lists the things to include in the personal statement, just so you've had a bit of time to think about the sorts of things that we're going to plan. So, now for the main planning feature. So, what I think is the best way to do this is to just draw a spider diagram or a mind map or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just going to write personal statement. Okay. Now, these things that I've listed here in the top right hand corner, this is going to form the basis for the plan. It's going to be the very broad structure of your personal statement. So the first thing I think we need to do is to just create those sections on our mind map. Okay. So, why do you want to study medicine? So I'm just going to put why medicine, or just put why. Make it nice and short. Why do you want to study medicine? Right, I'll put why medicine because of the next point. Why medicine? And we'll do a different colour for each of these sections. Just because I have a feeling it's going to get a little bit messy by the time we're finished. So it'll be good to be able to distinguish between the different sections. So why medicine? Why a doctor? Why do you want to be a doctor? And then I think the next point we have is your skills and your evidence. Now, I'm not going to write skills and evidence next. I'm actually just going to put your degree, because I believe that the degree that you've done, a lot of your skills that you are going to write about are actually going to come from your degree or from work experience. I don't think you necessarily need one section listing your skills. I think it's very easy to put it within the personal statement inside other sections. So the degree and sort of what you've learned, or what I've learned from that. Okay. So the next section is going to be work experience, volunteering, paid work, things like that. So choose another colour. Oh no, I picked up the wrong one. Okay, so I'm just going to put work experience. I need to save space for that, because that's going to be quite a big section. Okay, so we've got each of these sections listed around here, and you can go through them in any order you want. I'm just going to start there and go around just because that's easiest, but obviously if you're doing it, you don't have to do it in the same order. Okay, so firstly, why medicine? Probably the most difficult question when you're applying to medicine, in my opinion. To be honest, this question, it takes a lot of thinking about, and if you're anything like me, there is not a simple answer. You're going to have so many different reasons. Or you might have always known that you've wanted to be a doctor since you were 8 years old, for example. I think at this point it's important, and I'll just put it as a point, try not to use very cliched phrases. You haven't known you've wanted to do medicine since you were a baby, because you probably didn't even know what a doctor was when you were a baby, let's be honest. So, I mean, yes, be honest, but at the same time try not to use overused phrases that have been used by hundreds, if not thousands, of people before you. So that's just something to point out. So for me, there were so many different reasons. and those were personal reasons, from like family experiences to things that I've seen and observed in work experience, and also a particular interest of mine is sort of holistic care and making sure that the care isn't just for the patients, but it's also for the family as well, because at the end of the day the family are affected almost in just the same way as a patient is. And I've always been a true believer that you need to focus on both the patient but also their family, their friends and their relatives. So that's just my thing. You'll have your own reasons, but there's that. So, the second bit. Why do you want to be a doctor? So, why do you want to be a doctor? So, I've been an HCA, and I know for me that nursing or being a healthcare assistant isn't what I want. I've always thought that I actually like to be involved in the diagnosing of patients and that whole sort of process of problem solving and trying to figure out what is wrong with the patient and why they are experiencing the symptoms that they have. So that's sort of why I've wanted to be a doctor. And it's obviously because I'm caring, but that's very cliche, so you might want to avoid saying that because you care for people so much and you just want to help people, although that is going to be true, or at least I hope it's true, that's not enough. You need something else. Okay? Right, next bit. Your degree and what you've learned. Now, as I said, you might not think you have anything to say about this, but when you start to think about it, you will realise that actually there is a lot. So, just so you know what I've done, I have done a medical science degree. Okay, so that's what I've done, just so you have a brief background on the things that I'm going to be talking about. So, things that I personally have learned from my degree. Obviously, I have learned a lot of terms of things of knowledge, so scientific knowledge, especially given that I've done a medical science degree. And that's really important. They're going to want to know what you've learned, especially if it's relevant to medicine, which science is. But linked to that, I've learnt how complex medicine is. It's not easy. And everything sort of is related with all topics are sort of related with each other, and there isn't one explanation for something. There are always going to be alternative explanations, and so it's very complex. Okay, so so my memory card ran out of memory, even though it was empty. So I was just talking about transferable skills and how my degree has really helped improve so many of my transferable skills. And this is actually really important in medicine, and this is something that they look for in your application. So, for me personally, transferable skills that have really been developed throughout my degree are my self-directed learning skills. Because we've had lots of topics that we've had to basically teach ourselves through textbooks, reading papers, journals, videos online, things like that. And that's something that I've really developed throughout my medical science degree. Other things include my oral communication skills and I can actually give specific examples on how this has been improved. And for me, it was through presentations. And you wouldn't need to write this in your actual personal statement, but mine's were on drugs and antidepressants. I remember that was in my second year. I've obviously had lots of other chances of improving oral communication skills, but that's just one specific example that I can think of off the top of my head. And this is quite a generic transferable skill, but is so important nonetheless, and that is teamwork. And this has been done through group work, and that's both written group work where we have to work together to do a report, but also practical group work, so working in the labs, doing experiments and things like that. So those are some transferable skills. Also, in addition to that, you've got leadership. So for me, and this is an example, if you have something similar to include in your personal statement, but I was a student technology ambassador, which basically I had to work with other people and sort of interact with members of staff at university and help set up lecture recording software and sort of not necessarily train the staff on how to set it up, but sort of offer advice and show them how to do it if they had forgotten how to do it. So that's another thing. And problem solving. So that's also another quite generic one, but again, important. So as you can see there, I've learned a lot from my degree, but it's particularly important in the transferable skills. And that's what's important, and that's what you're going to have to discuss and expand upon in your personal statement. Okay, so here we go. Work experience. Right. So work experience. Work experience can be split up basically into different forms. So first of all, you've got paid work. And then you've got volunteering, and I mean sort of like, regular volunteering, but then you've also got shadowing, when you're following a doctor, a junior doctor or a consultant around a hospital for a week or 3 days or however long it is, so that'll be shadowing. So I've personally done a bit of both, or a bit of all of them. And so for me, for my paid work, I was a healthcare assistant. And the things that I have learned from being a healthcare assistant was, well, firstly, that it's not what I want to do. And I really thought about this. Not what I can't write. I want to do. And I really thought about this, and the reason why I realised that it's not what I want to do is because I'm not part of that coming up with diagnosis, diagnosing patients and figuring out what is wrong with them. As a healthcare assistant, I had many roles, and this is also something that you might want to include if you're a healthcare assistant, your roles. So I had to take vitals and help with just sort of day-to-day tasks, right? So I would help them with their eating, or I would help to wash the patients, and I'd sort of accompany them to the toilet, or I would act as a chaperone. I had so many different tasks, and as a healthcare assistant, you see how all of these are really, really important. And that is something that they will really like to hear in your personal statement. Your ability to say that yeah, okay, it's not pretty, right? Being a healthcare assistant is not pretty, but it is really, really, really important. Without healthcare assistants and without nurses, hospitals would not exist. They play such an important role, and it's so important not to devalue them and sort of look down upon them. So that's paid work. Volunteering. Okay, so I'm actually going to start off with shadowing because it leads into my volunteering, and you'll see why. So I'm not going to list all the shadowing roles that I've done. I don't think I need to. I'm just going to talk about a couple of my experiences and what I've learnt. So, for example, I have done a lot of work in sort of cancer and oncology. And you can say that you've spent 1 week here and then you spent 2 weeks there. And don't include hospital names, but you can say, I spent 1 week on an oncology ward and I really enjoyed that, so I've spent 2 weeks shadowing a doctor in a cancer and haematology centre, for example. Right? So that's what I did there. But then you can't just list it, you have to say what you learnt from that experience. So for me personally, I saw the importance of emotional resilience, or just how important it is to stay emotionally strong and in a way to sort of detach your emotions from yourself, and how it was really difficult at times, but at the same time it was also so rewarding, because you could see patients who had recovered and were now living perfectly normal lives after suffering cancer, which was just amazing. So there was that, and then I also spent time on an ophthalmology ward, and this was very, very different, and that's something that I pointed out in my personal statement, how it was much smaller but equally important. It was very different. There weren't as many inpatients. It was more outpatient and day case treatment. But again, it was very important. Another thing, and this is going to lead into my volunteering section, I told you this would get messy, was I spent a week in paediatrics. I spent a week shadowing a doctor who works across the whole of paediatrics at my local hospital. And in this placement, I discovered how working with children is so different to working with adults. And they have a lot more difficulties and stumbling blocks when it comes to diagnosing children rather than adults, and a lot of it is because children they can't verbalize what they are feeling. They can't say what sort of pain it is, and if they're really young they can't tell you where the pain is. All they're going to do is cry. So that was something that I found quite interesting when I was in the paediatric department. So this actually encouraged me in a way it sort of stimulated my interest in paediatrics. I found that I really enjoyed that sort of additional difficulty when it came to diagnosing children, but also how rewarding it was when you could see these kids were so much better and they weren't crying all the time and they were happy and they were playing with their toys and living life as a kid should. You know what I mean? So that's what encouraged me to volunteer for roughly 2 hours every week at the paediatric intensive care unit at a large children's hospital. And so I did this every week, and I was what they call a ward host. And I had a vast variety of things that I was able to do. So I could help the nurses in not their clinical duties, but for example, if they wanted me to help distract not necessarily help distract, but play with either the patient, just to help their stay be a bit more interesting, or play with siblings so that they weren't running around the whole of the intensive care unit, because obviously parents often have more than one child, and so the other kids need to be entertained. Or I would be sat at the reception desk answering the phones and letting people in and making sure people who weren't allowed in didn't come in. So I had a wide range of roles, but something that particularly stuck with me, which might seem really strange, was the effect that a cup of tea or a cup of coffee could have on parents, or some squash given to a sibling. I saw how important they could just, in a way, get a moment of normality. They could drink their tea and they didn't have to worry about going out and leaving their child. They could just stay where they were, and I'd come around with a tea trolley, and you could see sort of the smile on their face and how grateful these parents were for somebody caring about them as well as their child. And that sort of links into my whole holistic care and caring for the patients and the family. So that would be something else I would talk about in my personal statement. So there was that as well. So I'm just having a think and trying to think about if I've missed anything. And as far as I'm aware, I can't think of anything. So I hope this plan, if you've planned along with me, has been helpful. This is exactly what I did when I started my personal statement. I got a blank piece of paper and I just tried to write down everything that I thought was relevant. And as you can see, it doesn't have to be neat. This is I have a draft in front of me, and this has still turned out to be messy, and it does not matter. It's just what you need to do is write down everything that is relevant. Then you can type it up into paragraphs or sentences or even bullet points, and then you can gradually condense it and get rid of the bits that you don't need. So that's how I would do it. As I said at the start, when you've got this and when you write it up onto a computer, you will see that it is way too long. For me, when I first typed up for my very first draft for my personal statement draft was over 2 pages long. Now bear in mind that 4,000 characters and 47 lines, that actually ends up to be less than an A4 piece of paper. So for mine to have been over 2 pages long, I had to cut out so much. And there was that. Now I just want to go back. You may or may not have noticed that I haven't mentioned about any personal experiences that I have had that have caused me to want to go to medicine. And that's something that I think you should think about, whether or not you want to include it. I'll put that as an extra point. And I'll just put personal experiences. Right? For me personally, I could write a whole personal statement just on my personal experiences when it comes to being in hospital, GPs, death, cancer, surgery, operations, long-term stays in hospital, short-term stays in hospital, outpatient appointments. I could talk about every aspect there is to being in hospital and general medicine. But I personally did not mention it at all in my personal statement. I didn't even mention it. It just did not exist at all in my personal statement. You, for example, might want to write about it here in your plan. Write what you have experienced or what you've learnt from it, and then decide later on if you want to include it or not. Things to consider when you're doing this is that some medical schools might see it as sort of you're trying to get pity from them, or you're trying to sort of make them feel sad or feel bad for you, especially if someone you know has died, which is obviously really sad and unfortunate, but that shouldn't necessarily be your main reasons for doing medicine. And at the end of the day, so many people go into hospital and so many people die. And if you personally have had experiences which has in a way made your journey to medicine more difficult, that might be something you might want to tell your referee to include in their reference. For me, my personal tutor wrote about all my extenuating circumstances and how difficult they were, but not necessarily as a bad thing, but how it actually made me stronger as a person, and how it encouraged me to do well and really prioritise my time and make sure that although so much was going on at the time, I still focused on my medicine application. So that's the angle that I took with it. Yours might be different. Really, I would leave it up to you. But just consider it. Maybe write it out, plan it, but don't decide from the start whether or not you definitely want to include it. So I think that is all that I have to say about the personal statement. I will do another video on tips and tricks for the personal statement in terms of advice from other people and help that you can get. But I think this is very much an initial planning your personal statement video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me down below in the comments. And thank you all for watching. I hope this has been useful. I thought I'd do a slightly different layout, so let me know if you've enjoyed this. Let me know if you can even read my handwriting. It started off neat, didn't it? But it got a little bit messy towards the end. But yes, thank you all for watching, and let me know if you have any questions or if you like this video. So thank you, and I'll see you next time. Bye!